Arizona basketball hits the end of the road in a very, very disappointing game against Clemson. We are going to get to a lot of that, what happens, what it means for Arizona going forward, all that and more here on Locked On Wildcats.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Wildcats your first listen of the day. We're doing the post-game show. All right, Arizona falls to Clemson, and this was a devastating loss for a variety of different reasons. First, Arizona, as many of you know, has not been to a has not been to a Final Four now, and it was going on 24 years. I think everybody looked at the bracket and they're like, okay, well, this is a pretty nice setup for Arizona. I think you got to be pretty excited about that. And then the game starts and Arizona did not look like they were ready at all. I mean, that's pretty much the way it is. You can't spot a team 13 points, which is essentially what they did. It was 29-16 at one point. And not only did Arizona spot them points, Arizona just looked like they looked kind of a little bit lethargic in the process. Now, there's a lot that we need to get to here. We're just going to go kind of player by player. The first player we need to talk about is Kylan Boswell. Now, there's a lot of other players that we are going to get to, but Arizona's got to figure out what they are going to do with this point guard situation moving forward. Now, listen, I get that he's 18. I get all of that, but there's obviously been a lot of issues with Kylan on the court. You know, obviously he enjoys himself off the court. That's fine. But when it becomes a little bit detrimental to the team, that becomes that to me is more of a concern. But my bigger concern is Tommy Lloyd and just kind of how he's dealt with Kylan Boswell this season. And again, to be clear, I think Tommy Lloyd's fantastic. I hope Tommy Lloyd is here for the next 30 years. But I think that he's done himself or Kylan Boswell a little bit of a disservice by essentially enabling him to do whatever he wanted. Let's be honest. We're watching Arizona this year. You watched it. I watched it. We all have eyes. Kylan Boswell many times was the worst player on the court for Arizona, and he was many times the worst player on the court, period. And no matter what Kylan Boswell did, he was never going to be benched, and his minutes were never going to be cut. Look at this this Clemson game. The best player on the court for Arizona was Jaden Bradley. Jaden Bradley got 3 more minutes than Kylan Boswell. That's just unacceptable. There's really no other way to put it, especially when you're looking to win games. I get the whole thing about we need to love on Kylan. We need to do all of this. I totally understand all of that. But at the end of the day, your job is still to win basketball games. And for a huge percentage of the time, he was a massive liability. And that's something that goes with the coach. And I think back to the gambling picture. And again, we're going to get to all the players because it was far from just Kylan. But I look at the gambling picture where he's clearly not 21 and he's stepping up to a blackjack table. That led me to believe that he didn't really fear any consequences from the coach. And not only did he not fear any consequences from the coach, he also didn't get any playing time consequences. The whole thing about, well, you know, we disciplined him behind the scenes. No, that's all. I don't buy into any of that. That's all nonsense. You bench a kid in a situation like that, they need to learn. Now, so listen, that's kind of where it is. Now we got a lot of other guys to get to. Next one is Caleb Love. Now, I've been a big fan of Caleb Love this season, but there's really no other way to put it, is that Caleb Love the last 4 or 5 games was bad. And really bad. And a lot of it was just chucking up threes that had no chance of going in. Now, I believe that whether it was him, whether it was Tommy Lloyd, somebody needed to come to the realization that, hey, the best way to be able to win this, to be able to get going when you're not making threes is to be able to get to the hoop, to be able to get down a hill. Because he did that, especially in the second half against Clemson. He was able to do that. He was able to get downhill, and Arizona was better for it. And then stopped doing it again. I don't know if that's coaching. I don't know if that's a player. I don't know what the case is, but that shouldn't have happened. There should have been something where it was, all right, you do it, you do that. There's got to be some form of accountability, and there really was no form of accountability. That to me is a little bit of the issue, is that it does feel like, and again, I love Lloyd, but we got to be honest here. We got to critique a little bit. And I think a big part of it is that it just kind of felt like players were just kind of allowed to do whatever they want. Now, I very much enjoy the alternative of Lloyd as opposed to Sean Miller, who was just going to scream and just yell expletives the whole time. That did nothing for me. But when it comes to this, you got to also be honest about where everything's at. And Arizona was just not good enough. And it felt like players were allowed to kind of do whatever they want. And Caleb Love, he was Pac-12 Player of the Year. He was a third-team All-American, but he was bad down the stretch. There's no other way to put it. Then Pella Larson. Pella was awful in this game. I was wrong on Pella to begin with. I didn't really ever see Pella being good here. Pella's a good player, but Pella is also limited, and Pella also does some dumb things, and that missed layup down the when Arizona could have gone up 3 was huge because Clemson went right back the other way and took the lead again, in which they never looked back. Again, Larson is a good player, but when Arizona's lost their games in the NCAA tournament, whether that's Princeton, whether that was Clemson, Pella Larson was terrible. And, that's just kind of the way it is. When you've got a starting perimeter that was essentially AWOL, everybody was an F. Kylan Boswell was terrible. Caleb Love was terrible. Pella Larson was terrible. It's going to be very difficult to be able to win those games. Then up front, Umar Ballo, he had a good stat line, but the big problem again about not being able to make free throws really reared its head. And the problem with Umar is that with those free throws, he never really gave those free throws a chance of being able to go in. I mean, those things were hitting the front of the rim so quickly that there was really no chance that those shots were going to go in. That's something that Arizona is obviously, I'd like to get Umar Ballo back, but they got, that was a huge liability. I'm kind of surprised that more teams didn't go in that direction. Then Keshad, Keshad's a good basketball player. I guess I just thought he was going to be a little bit more of a junkyard dog, a full energy type. And again, he was good. He was probably the best of all the starters, but we're always kind of looking for a little bit more out of Keshad, and you didn't quite really ever get that. But again, he was far from the problem. The starting perimeter was absolutely terrible. It was atrocious, and there's no other way to really get around that. And that's something that is certainly going to need to be addressed. Now, there were a few bright spots in this game that should be good for Arizona going forward. We're going to talk about that next. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats, making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Mike Luke, doing the Postgame Wrapup, Arizona Clemson. All right, now let's talk some of the bright spots. Jaden Bradley was absolutely fantastic. Not only was Jaden Bradley absolutely fantastic, Jaden Bradley was that dude who he wanted the ball down the stretch. He was making plays. He was getting to the basket. He was pulling up for threes. He was awesome. There was no other way to put it. He was a dog out there. While a lot of people were talking about what they could do, what they wanted to do, Jaden Bradley did that. And not only did he do that, he was absolutely exquisite in the process. And I think it's something that Arizona, I think, had its point guard. Now, I think a big problem I think we're going to have is Tommy Lloyd should have been playing this dude a lot earlier. And again, this isn't Monday morning quarterbacking. I've been saying this for a couple months now, said this earlier in the year, that Jaden Bradley's better than Kylan Boswell. Again, I get that you recruited Kylan. You have an affinity for Kylan. Jaden Bradley's better. Jaden Bradley is just better pretty much across the board. Defensively, he is a very unique player in that he is able to get his hands are incredibly active. They're strong, which leads to a lot of steals, leads to a lot of rebounds or blocks. And then offensively, he's a lot better than people give him credit for. He's able to get downhill. He's able to get in the lane. And when he gets into the lane, he's able to finish. He was a dynamo. And not only was he a dynamo, he was somebody that was just, you kind of wonder where Arizona would have been without Jaden Bradley, because he kept Arizona in the game against Arizona in the game against Dayton. And then, he did the same thing against Clemson. This dude should have been playing more. And when you look at it and the fact that he only got 24 minutes, probably should have gotten 32 minutes, 33, 34 minutes. He was Arizona's best player. The whole thing about how we have to play certain players certain minutes no matter what, don't really understand where that is, because that makes absolutely no sense to me. Now, I think with moving forward, they're going to obviously going to be some discussions about that. But Jaden Bradley is a player that you absolutely cannot lose. And not only can you not lose, you have to be able to build around him. And not only will we be able to, you got to be able to build around him. He and KJ Lewis have got to be two of those dudes. KJ Lewis, another one, probably should have played more. KJ Lewis should have been that dude who, just going to say it, should have played more. I mean, he's a dog. He's physical. He wants the moment. And he's something that you're going to need in the Big 12 moving forward, because Arizona didn't have a lot of those guys. Pelle Larsson, again, was absolutely terrible in this game. And I felt that, let's be honest here, that KJ Lewis should have gotten some of those minutes. Now, again, I get that he was getting beat backdoor on the cut. Totally understand that. But Pelle Larsson had his fair share of defensive snafus as well. This was KJ's a beast. KJ's an NBA player. KJ needed to be out there more. I think he and Jaden Bradley both needed to be out there more. And not only did they need to be out there more, I think they needed to, I think that needed to be a bigger part of the rotation. And I think that's going to be something going forward. Now, I think going forward into the Big 12, the best players got to play. I'm just going to call it the way it is. The best players didn't always play this year. And now, again, I get that you have an affinity for certain players. You get a loyalty because you recruited them. You don't want to give up on them. Guess what? You don't have to give up on a player and not play them, or you don't have to give up on a player by benching him. That basically just means that, okay, you're going through some stuff right now. We're going to take a little bit of a step back. And, then we're going to reevaluate. But everybody watching the game knew that Jaden Bradley should have been out there more. And I'm not really breaking any news. I think what happens is, and again, I know I sound like I'm really beating up on Lloyd. I'm going to be kind of hard on him on this game, but I'm thrilled that he's going to be here at the U of A. He's been very, very good for Arizona. I hope he's going to be the coach here for the next 500 years. But there are some things that he's got to learn. And again, I like the fact that he's a good dude. I like the fact that, there's not this F-bomb laced tirade every 35 seconds like, there was under Sean Miller. I appreciate that, because I think that's just a better way to conduct yourself. But at the same time, that also doesn't mean that just turning a blind eye to absolutely everything that's going on. Again, if a player's caught at a blackjack table, he should be benched, period. There's other stuff going on off the court that needs to be addressed, period. Hopefully coming in next year, you got a little bit of a blank slate. You got a whole new list of guys coming in, NBA players at that, which is that's a big thing in all of this, is you're going to have NBA players, or at least, because again, you can go back to it a little bit to a certain degree that, if you don't have NBA guys, then you're going to be susceptible to this, because you don't look at a lot of champions and say, man, they didn't have any NBA players out there. But really what kind of did this team in was, it was a combination of things, but the starting perimeter just didn't come to play. And I think, listen, I mean, we kind of knew with Boswell what the deal was, but I think with Caleb Love, that was just very, very, very disappointing, especially with the way that Caleb had played. He had been the Pac-12 player of the year. He had been a third-team All-American. He had just been a good basketball player. And he essentially laid an egg, and when the opportunity was there to drive the ball, he didn't drive the ball. And I thought, and then with Pelle, again, I'm not the biggest Pelle fan in the world. He's a solid player, but Pelle was also very passive. And Pelle just kind of does some dumb things out there. Again, I don't know that any of these players are NBA players. Maybe they are. I don't really see it, but I guess we'll find that one out. But Arizona going into the Big 12, you got to have a roster revamp again. You got to get tougher players, period. You got to get tougher dudes, because you're going into a conference now that is absolutely loaded, and it's loaded with tough players across the board. And that's something that Arizona is going to have to, contend with. So we'll find out where Tommy Lloyd's at with that. Now, we've got obviously Arizona basketball. We're going to talk about that all off season, but we're also going to talk some Arizona football, because practice is here, going to be out there breaking everything down. We are a football school as well. But again, just kind of a very frustrating performance by Arizona. And I think it's something that Tommy Lloyd's going to have to look himself in the mirror and make some changes. But Tommy Lloyd's also a pretty smart guy. I think he's a fairly reflective guy. I think he'll figure it out. But again, you don't need to get rid of Tommy Lloyd. He's been fantastic. But again, he's far from perfect. It's also his third year as a head coach with all of that. So on that note, though, very much appreciate you guys all making Locked On Wildcats your post-game listen, and we will be back with you on Monday. Again, hopefully we have better news then, but bear down, back the A.